everyone. I'm Dr. Jyoti Rao, and I'm here with our health coach at Shakti Health and Wellness, Alicia Davis. Hi, Alicia. And
Okay.
she is going to be helping us run this webinar on lifestyle as medicine, which is a foundation for healthy aging. As many of you know, that Shakti is built on the premise of an integrative model of medicine, which includes a large component of it is a lifestyle um, role. And Alicia is going to go through each part. One of the reasons we have a health coach in our practice is because people need assistance in making the changes. When people see me for the consult, we outline many, many things for people to do that involve multiple steps. It can be overwhelming. And I think that there's the role for Alicia has been to guide people, educate them, as well as try to figure out ways to take away barriers and obstacles to try to get things done. Mostly with the lifestyle, there's so much to do and so much to learn about. And I encourage people to ask questions. We have a nice sized group here today, and this will be recorded and sent out to those people who have registered but couldn't make it tonight. So please be involved in the chat in terms of questions and answers, and we'll get to that after the main presentation. So with that, I will introduce Alicia, and she's going to educate us on all the ways that we can live a healthier, more fulfilling, happier life.
Thank
Thank you, Alicia.
you, Dr. Rao. Appreciate the opportunity to share this time with everyone. Thanks for joining. As Dr. Rao mentioned, this time is about a few of the foundations of healthy aging, not all of them, but we chose three specifically. When we talk about lifestyle as medicine, tonight we're going to talk about the three foundations that I believe float to the top in terms of importance related to healthy aging and living well, which is nutrition, how we're moving our bodies, and sleep. And so we see many times that small improvements in these areas can really have a meaningful impact on our energy, our strength. We'll talk a lot today about metabolic health and what that means, our mood, and how well we function as we age. We will also show you how the medical and the coaching team at Shakti can support you in translating all the recommendations that Dr. Rao mentioned into realistic steps that fit into your life. As we go through all of this, understand that you do not need to make every change that we talk about tonight. As you listen, notice what stands out to you, especially in an area where you know what to do or you may know what to do, but you're having trouble putting it into practice. That's often where coaching can help. Our goal isn't perfection. It's to help you start where you are, focus on the next most helpful step, and make progress that you can sustain. And we will leave time at the end for questions, as mentioned. And so jot some things down. Even if you think, oh, that might be low-hanging fruit for me, jot a couple of things down. And if there's something you want to go into detail about at the end, we'll save time for that. So when we talk about modifiable lifestyle factors, again, tonight we'll focus on nutrition, movement, and sleep. And when I talk about this, I want you to think about, if you look at this tree, this is an example of what we call the functional medicine tree. And so these modifiable lifestyle factors sit at the roots of the tree. They shape the internal environment of the body, and they can influence inflammation, our metabolism, and how our genes are actually expressed, including whether or not you go on to develop disease. So we can't change the genes that we inherit, but we often have more influence over our health trajectory than many of us realize. Even small improvements in one of these areas can begin moving the body in a healthier direction. And so, Dr. Rao, in your practice, do you often see patients who assume that their family history means that a health condition is inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty dramatic shift in thought process because there's a lot of fear with that.
Yeah.
One of the issues that we need to learn about is that genes are not our destiny. And like you said, there's the concept of epigenetics, which is directly influenced by lifestyle factors, which that is why we spend so much time and energy on that. And I love that you mentioned that there's a starting point and we have the genes that we have there's fixed risk factors for all of us, and then there's mutable ones. And today is all about changing the mutable ones, and we're going to put the genes on the side because there's very, very few genetic predispositions that are 100% transferred. So, that's a very key point, and I do want to eliminate that fear for people that says just because this is in my family or my parents have this happen. One, you have to look at the quality of their life and what they did. I think there's a lot more focus on health and longevity now. We're making hopefully better choices when we learn more about things. We know a lot more than we did 20 years ago in terms of how to age. In fact, some in functional medicine think that aging is now a disease and that we have ways to slow down that train significantly based on our decisions that we make every day.
Every day. So, very powerful. Thank you. Um, so we'll talk again a lot about metabolic health tonight in the webinar. And really the concept is how well is your body managing fuel? I won't get too technical tonight, but I will mention there was a study published in the Journal of American Cardiology in 2022 that looked at over 55,000 US adults. And they found that only 6.8% had optimal cardiometabolic health. So basically, more than 9 in 10 adults have room to improve in this area. And so really, metabolic health is how well our body uses and stores fuel. So it influences things like our blood sugar, our cholesterol, our blood pressure, how our energy, how much energy we have, and things like our weight. And it also reflects how well things like nutrition, movement, and our sleep habits are working together, which often means that when we can improve one of these, it can support those other areas. So, Dr. Rao, do you typically find that early metabolic changes are connected to several lifestyle factors that are working together rather than just one single cause?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that this is the beauty of all this is that things are related. You can start in many different paths. It's not, we don't all have to do diet first or work on stress reduction first. Everything's connected, which makes it really great, but could be really overwhelming when people listen to all the different variables. But really want to encourage the idea that you just have to start somewhere. And yes, everything is related. And you don't wake up one day with diabetes. You don't wake up one day with hypertension. It's a gradual process of metabolic changes and inflammation that can affect blood vessel health and fat accumulation and so many different inflammatory conditions that can release with cytokines that we really need to understand that we have so much more control over our choices and our destiny and also with what our choices in terms of lifestyle so that we can reduce illness at the end of the day, right? So we want to start with before the symptoms start. We want to be able to be really proactive in prevention. But even when you have something that started up like high blood pressure, at any different one of these points, whether you're decreasing your smoking or you're working on activity or you're trying to change your diet, you can come in from any direction.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, because these areas often overlap, coaching can help a patient decide where to begin, right? We may choose one change that has a ripple effect across many areas rather than trying to fix everything at once. And I see a lot of times that helps build momentum and encouragement to keep that process going, right? So it helps minimize some of that overwhelm.
Also, most people, when they come in and they're having all this inflammation, they're tired. And if I tell someone you have to change your diet, move more, sleep better, don't stress out, make sure you're shopping for the right fruits and vegetables, and they're already really tired, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why we have Alicia, and they you can pick the starting point for people and start that process.
Yeah. What's acceptable, right? Okay. Um, well, we'll start with my favorite topic here and go into nutrition. Um, this is probably the most technical slide, but it's one of my favorite and visualizations to help you understand the concept of nutrition and metabolic health, because a stable blood sugar equals helps us maintain insulin sensitivity. And what does that mean? One of the best and most effective ways to support our metabolic health is to help the body manage blood sugar and insulin more efficiently. And so you'll see the graph here. So this is representative of highs and lows in our blood sugar when we fuel our body, basically when we eat. And so our glucose response is influenced by many factors, and understanding those is important. So it's not just the food we eat, it's what we pair it with, it's the timing of our meals. The quality of our sleep the night before can greatly impact our blood sugar regulation the next day. Even our muscle mass, the muscle works like a sink in soaking up extra circulating glucose. So these are all things that we consider in how well we're managing. And the goal isn't a perfectly flat glucose line. It's how do we make sure we have greater flexibility and the ability to use fuel well, which is a whole nother webinar that we'll look to in the future. But maintaining steady energy, how do we recover between meals, right? So we'll talk today about how to structure food in that way. Meals that include protein, adequate fiber, a healthy fat. These meals generally create a steadier response than meals with a refined carbohydrate or sweets that are taken in just by themselves. And so eating in a balanced way can help us avoid these extreme glucose spikes, those crashes and just not feeling great a couple of hours after we eat. And these, what we know is that these spikes in our glucose over time can drive chronic inflammation. And if you remember back on the tree, chronic inflammation can lead to what we know is the expression of disease, which is the top of these tree, which is diabetes, heart disease, cancer, things like that. So Dr. Rao, in what circumstance would you recommend someone monitoring their glucose a little more in depth, like using a continuous glucose monitor for a patient?
So I love everything you said, Alicia, because I get a lot of patients who come in who also are eating well. They're not eating a lot of sugar, but they're pre-diabetic or their sugar control's off. And it's the timing, it's what they eat, it's the how is their muscle mass. But the biggest thing that I found is their sleep and stress directly impacts the sugar. Most of the time, I'm asking a lot of my patients to do the CGM, the continuous glucose monitoring, because people don't realize that their energy and their mood fluctuates with their sugar. And so it's very enlightening to see when these things dip, but also when they go up, what is happening with their sugar and why they're feeling irritable, or why they feel brain fog, or why they feel different emotional things that have never been associated with their food. So I love the continuous glucose monitor. I think it's a great tool for most people, even for aging, because the highs and the lows that you've listed on this chart are also associated with fat deposition. So when we have high and low insulin levels that translate into high and low blood sugar, changes in insulin can cause massive depositions of fat. So sometimes we're chasing that because we don't have continuous insulin monitors. And so I like looking at the glucose as a variable that can be associated with what insulin's doing. And as you know, Alicia, as well as maybe some of the patients, that insulin resistance is associated with things like dementia, as type 3 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, which can increase risk for heart disease, along with things like regular diabetes, as well as nerve and muscle wasting. So there's a lot of aging issues tied in with this glucose fluctuation,
Yeah.
not just the fact that they're their hemoglobin A1C is up.
Yeah. And what might be right for me or not great for me is not the same for you. And so,
Absolutely.
right, I mean, I may be able to eat grapes and that may send you through the roof. And the data, bringing in additional sources of data creates awareness. But the numbers alone can be confusing. A CGM can be confusing. And so that's where we as a team can come in and help turn that data and that insight, the awareness, into practical action. So what do I need to do for me? What makes sense for me?
The only last thing I'll say about CGMs is that it's really tied in how lifestyle helps. So I find people are very shocked by how their sugar does better on days they sleep better, for example. Their sugar does better if they walked 15 minutes after dinner. Their sugar does better if they ate the carbs last and had the protein first. And so you pick up on all these tools, these little things that you may have ignored on how your sugars can do better in your body, like you said, versus my body. And so it's a great test now, and it's very reasonable price test that I think most people should consider doing it.
All right, when I talk about a balanced plate, and I'll have you consider this concept through the next section on nutrition. This is just an example to get a visual of what that might look like, and how we partner foods to help support metabolic health and keep blood sugar steady. Um, this is one of the simplest ways to put metabolic health into practice, is how we are composing our meals and our snacks in our day. And so instead of encouraging people to count calories or chasing some perfect diet, we build meals based on a foundation around a few key components. And so starting with protein, whether that's animal-based or plant-based, protein is necessary for muscle and blood sugar support. We've already talked a little bit about that. How much do we need? We'll get into specifics about that in a second, but really looking on average of around 25 to 30 grams per meal, front loading that in the morning. I'll mention to you why that's important in a minute, but 3 to 5 ounces of protein or the palm of your hand, about that size, will give you about 25 grams of protein in a sitting. We want fiber-rich plants, about half our plate. So you think about it that way. Fiber helps slow digestion, and it also helps support and feed the gut. And so if we are slowing digestion, we are slowing that insulin response. Our body it's allowing our body time to absorb those nutrients in a way that keeps our blood sugar more steady. We also want healthy fats for absorption. How much of those depends on your specific condition. We'll talk to you about that, but typically 1 to 2 tablespoons of healthy fats, or if you're having something animal-based, like an omega protein, like a salmon, we'll get that for you. And then smaller portions of things like starch forward. I say smaller portions, something like a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup, if you can visualize that. Beans, the higher sugar fruits, starchy veggies, keep those to a minimum based on individual needs again, to prevent that sharp spike in our sugar. And then when we can tolerate it, gut supporting foods like fermented foods, like kraut and kimchi, yogurts, kefir, are very important to add in during the day to help support the microbiome. And this is a great foundation. If you can think of this, start thinking it in terms of not calories, but how you're balancing out those components in your meals. And based on your needs, the medical team and I will work to personalize this for you. Because if you have insulin resistance, if you have prediabetes, if you have heart disease, we will individualize your portions based on that. And so, if you're wanting to lose weight, it might be that we eliminate some of those extra carbs that we have available to you in a balanced plate for right now, just to get things kind of moving in the right direction and help you build a plan that supports the goals that you want to live with. And so I'll ask you, Dr. Rao, when you're individualizing nutritional guidance for one of your patients, say with someone that has insulin resistance, typically how do you do that? What are the things that you focus on?
Yeah, I think I focus on kind of understanding what, carbs are not the bad guy. So, like you have here, the roughage, the fiber part, those are good carbs. The complex carbs, the beans, the lentils, the vegetables, those are going to also be great carbs. So I do talk about half the plate like you're doing here. We talk about the size of the protein, to increase that for people to kind of get that sugar not to go up and down like this. Also to minimize things, even their drinks, right? So the one comment I would say is also calories from drinks, whether they're sodas or even diet sodas, things like that. They're not helpful for blood sugar, in my opinion, because they can actually cause you to crave more sugar later. But to do more water and to do things that are maybe even fermented drinks like kefir. I love that you included fermented food in here because that's probably something I don't talk enough about. But it's a great idea to help that bacteria grow within the system to help coordinate because the bacteria in our gut do all of the help with all the metabolism issues. So the more good guys we have, the better we do with food intake. So a lot of what you have here is what I talk about. I just don't include the fermented food. And I love the picture of the plate because, before when we had the pyramid, made
Yeah,
no sense. Nobody eats in a pyramid.
yeah,
The plate is awesome because then you don't have to measure. It's a lot less stressful. You know where everything goes. And again, the nuts part, the fats part is also something I don't talk enough about, but I like the healthy fats there. It's really important to think about that when you're planning your meals because carbs, proteins, and fat all play in the same sandbox. So this is great and definitely a little bit more detailed than what I can get into with someone.
yeah. All right, we will launch into, I have 6 concepts to talk about related to nutrition, and these, for me, tend to rise to the top of the where I see my clients having the most questions, the most confusion about what to eat. Just tell me what to eat. And so I start with eat real food. And most of us don't need more complication in our lives, and certainly not a more complicated diet. And we need to be focusing on food that still looks like food in its whole form. And so, whole and minimally processed foods generally provide us with more fiber, more nutrients, and they have this power a lot more than highly refined foods do. And fiber is especially important. We're talking a lot about blood sugar management. It's also important for cholesterol management. We've talked about how it supports and feeds the gut, and it really helps us feel full. And most adults are not getting enough fiber. And so a practical goal is to gradually work towards about 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day or more when you can tolerate it. It's something you work up to slowly. And we do that getting in vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, intact whole grains if we're taking in whole grains in the diet and we're not limiting those. Um, in terms of real food, fresh and frozen foods both count. Some frozen foods have more nutrient density than their fresh counterparts, so we don't discount those. We also, I will also say that organic and local can be great choices if you have access to that, but they're not prerequisites for eating well. There is a resource in the webinar at the end that talks about the EWG, the Dirty Dozen, and the Clean 15. When you want to prioritize organics to eat, that's a great list to check and see which ones you might want to choose organic and which ones perhaps you could lean more conventionally with. I use that a lot. The priority here is building meals around a wider variety of whole foods more consistently. And the more you choose foods closer to their natural form, and you add in more fiber-rich plants to the meals that you already eat, the better off you're going to be. The second one, we want you to focus on food quality, not just calories. Calories do matter, of course, but they don't tell the whole story. If we focus first on quality and we talk about the balanced plate, I do see your questions in the Q&A about that. We'll talk about vegan protein as well, how to do that. The balanced plate approach is a more useful framework. So Dr. Rao mentioned the picture. If you can just get that in your mind, building your plate around adequate protein, fiber-rich plants, healthy fats as tolerated, it not only supports more fullness, steadier blood sugar, it's more sustainable than counting macros. And so once you understand how to create that balance and you work with that, it becomes, it's easier to do forever, because you just don't need to be, most people don't need to be tracking every calorie. And last on this one, but not least, spend a minute here because I think it's very important that we prioritize protein. Protein is preservation of muscle. It's preservation of strength. It supports bone and it supports metabolic health as we age. Because our body does become less responsive to protein over time. It takes more than it did when we were younger. Speaking to the ladies, we've talked a little bit about menopause. Menopause can accelerate muscle and bone loss, and we need adequate protein in menopause, along with resistance training. So it's very important in that transition as well. We want to choose minimally processed sources. So if you're animal-based, that's fish, seafood, poultry, eggs, lean meats, dairy, if you tolerate that. Good plant-based sources are going to be beans, lentils, tofu is great. Tempeh, edamame, again, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. There's a lot of controversy out there right now about how much protein do I need to get. So we'll give you some bumpers here. If you are active, an active adult, a useful daily range is about 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. And we will typically defer to ideal body weight in that case. A floor is about 60 grams per day, low floor where you want to hit. Some people can benefit, depending on your activity, your goals, your training and fitness goals, to up to 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. I find it's easy math that way. Instead of thinking 0.6, what do I do for my clients to shoot for that goal? Especially if someone's on a GLP-1 where they are trying to lose fat but preserve lean mass. It's very important. So again, I don't recommend counting macros, but if we've got someone that's never for a couple of days looked and counted how many grams of protein they're getting in a day, I do recommend that we pick an app and we do that as an exercise. Most people are under proteined. And if you've never looked at it before, you will be surprised usually that you're getting under what is recommended as a floor. The other thing we want to think about is how we distribute protein throughout the day, because it's important for our metabolic health, for satiety, feeling full, rather than what a lot of people do is they save their big protein meal for the end of the day. It really sets you up better if you front load protein at breakfast. And if you think about the breakfast that most typical Americans eat, it's high carb, low protein. So thinking this through is also strategically important for you, and aiming to get, if you think of, okay, I need 100 grams of protein in a day, and you divide that up for 3 meals and a snack, front loading your protein with about 30 to 40 grams breakfast is probably the way to go, with then maybe 25 and 25 at lunch and dinner. It better supports that glucose regulation we talked about, as well as it helps you feel fuller. And a lot of times we'll avoid that afternoon crash that a lot of us experience when we're heavy carbed in the morning. Dr. Rao, are there patients for whom you would recommend a higher protein target, or others where you would want us to individualize it more carefully?
I think you hit most of those areas. I feel like the people on GLP-1 really need to make an effort, because some of the protein loss, depending on the medicine, some of the weight loss that you have, depending on the medication you're on, semaglutide or tirzepatide, you can lose a significant amount, like 30% of your weight loss could be muscle mass.
Yeah.
So in order to preserve that, we really want to focus on the protein as well as the strength training. And as a currency, what I feel about aging is our muscle mass is actually the best currency we have to aging, like you had said before. And in order to fuel that, we need nutrients coming in from whole foods, but we also need the building blocks that amino acids can bring to help generate that, which then is so significant. So I think we talked about it in menopausal women, people who are catabolic, people who are in chronic injuries, chronic inflammation, they will start breaking down their muscle as a go-to for nutrients. And so their need for protein is going to be significantly higher. So we want to make sure they're hitting those targets that they're having. If you're not watching protein, 9 times out of 10, you're not getting enough because it's really challenging to get the protein, especially as a plant-based person. You have to make an effort to be able to quantify those things and add chickpeas and eat more tofu and beans and lentils. And, I think Indian food is great because it offers a lot of options, but we really have to be conscientious. So in the very sick, in the elderly, so if you're above 65, you want at least 65 grams and even higher if you're trying to build muscle. That's just to maintain. So that number 60, I feel like, is just to maintain your muscle mass. If you're trying to build, then we need a little bit higher goals. So menopausal women, yeah, the GLP-1 patients, chronic inflammation, those are really the ones we want to focus on, but everybody really should be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think it can be as simple as once we have medical parameters, if there's specific needs that someone has, turning that into reality. And so really looking at what someone is actually eating. We can do a 3-day diet analysis, typically where I start, and just everything that's going in. We find the gaps. I would say the same with fiber. If you've never looked at it, but I can't tell you today exactly how much fiber I'm getting. So how do I know if I'm getting 30 if I've never looked at it? So that might be an exercise as well. And then building a realistic plan without asking someone to completely overhaul their diet. That's just not necessary.
Yeah, the U2 things I usually leave people with is how much fiber and how much protein to eat. Because usually I think most of us are also underfibered.
I would agree. All right, last few here. Um, Eat the rainbow. I love this one for many reasons, but it's interesting to understand that colorful plants provide fiber, yes, but they have these beautiful chemicals, we call them phytochemicals, that help support our gut. And so many of us, that's where we start, is gut repair. I'm sure many of you are working with Dr. Rao on that. It also helps, as I mentioned, regulate blood sugar and keep inflammation in check. A simple way to think about fiber is fertilizer for those beneficial bacteria in the gut. And those bacteria use it to produce compounds that help support that intestinal lining. It supports immune function and supports, you guessed it, our metabolic health. For patients with digestive issues, I mentioned that more isn't always better right away. So sometimes we may begin by calming irritation first, identifying what might be triggers specific to you, and then working on gut repair before we then start to reintroduce diversity, expanding fiber and expanding plant variety. But that's where we kind of walk through those phases depending on your specific situation. But over time, the goal is to build tolerance and diversity with as many vegetables, as many colors as we can get in, fruits, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and aiming for variety rather than perfection. So I speak a lot about pick a color of the week, and then next, this week it's green, next week it's reds and yellows, and it can be as simple as just that's how you change your salad. Because different colors feed the body in different ways. It's important to consider that. The next one is limiting added sugars and ultra processed foods. I can't mention this enough. I think because we have to find a way. We need convenience foods today in society, but we've got to be better at picking the ones that we do. So if we're eating something that's packaged, how do we choose a better packaged food when we need to? And so ultra processed foods, they're designed specifically to overeat them. They are typically low in protein, low in fiber, and they're nutrient void most of the time. Um, and they don't obviously then keep our metabolism very stable. So we need to become what I call label literate. We need to be looking at the labels and paying particular attention to things like added sugars, not just the total sugar that something has. Um, Sugars aren't inherently bad, but in excess they can be, and they can go against the goals that we're trying to reach. Even things like natural sugars, honey, maple syrup, it might feel more natural, but the body still recognizes them as sugars, and we need to be careful with how much added sugar we're having in a day. Um, so there's a guide. I like to use a guide of 3 grams or less per serving. It's not written in stone anywhere, but it really helps us with a starting point. So think about that when you're looking at the label. We want to choose 100% whole grain if we're taking in grains on our diet at this time. So when you buy bread, crackers, or cereal, and we want to do that in moderation, especially if we're working specifically with you on your metabolic health. Um, Sweets are not the devil. And it's, choose the good ones, piece of dark chocolate, enjoy sweets intentionally, ideally after that balanced meal that you've had. Because if you set yourself up with a good base of protein, fiber, and fats, it kind of lays, I like the analogy of a fine mesh sieve versus a colander. So the fibers and the fats kind of lay that fine mesh sieve in our intestines, and it lets things pass through a little bit more slowly than if you had a colander, where if you took that piece of chocolate and you had it on an empty stomach, you're probably going to get that glucose spike. So think strategically about how you're bringing in those sweets. And lastly, we don't want to fear healthy fats. So fat is essential for our brain, for hormone production, for our cells to function. And we can't absorb certain vitamins unless we have fats along with it as a partner. And so we want to, though, prioritize unsaturated fats. Those are things that we get from like olive oils, avocados, nuts, seeds, fatty fish if you're taking in fish. It provides omega-3s, which support our heart and our brain health. Again, they help regulate inflammation. So if you're taking in fish, you want to aim for fatty fish about twice weekly. That's a good goal. But again, fat intake should be individualized, and we help with that. If we have someone that has cardiovascular disease or an elevated ApoB, for instance, our team might recommend keeping saturated fats below about 10% of your daily calories, sometimes lower. So we will individualize that for you. Healthy fats are nutrient dense, but they can be calorie dense, and portions do matter. So we can guide you on that. Dr. Rao, so we've talked about a lot about plant diversity, limiting added sugars, choosing healthy fats, but those recommendations don't work exactly the same for everyone. Can you give us an example of like, how do you decide what to prioritize for a particular patient?
Yeah, so I think that the fiber issue for some people with bad bugs, say SIBO, or if they have irritable bowel syndromes secondary to a food intolerance, certain foods that we say are healthy are not going to be tolerated, specifically within the fiber. I have a lot of people who we talk about trying to add fiber. They just can't do it. They can't have fermented foods. They're bugs in their gut at the moment that I see them. They're very, very irritable. So we have to kind of calm everything down. So there might be a time where you're not eating what's called FODMAP rich foods, which are kind of complex carbohydrates. Even though I want you to have complex carbohydrates, you may have to limit them while we're trying to heal the gut. The whole point is to try to change the gut so that we can introduce all of these great things. I don't think anyone will miss added sugar. In fact, for women, that number should be no more than 25 grams, and for men, 36. And I think those are also very high. I think we should have much lower than those as grams. But that's kind of the American Heart Association guidelines. And then same thing for fats. Like if you've had heart disease and if you've had significant issues with saturated fats, then maybe your certain fat percentage should be lower, maybe 10% of your overall intake. So we should be able to tweak some of these. I think these are great concepts, but sometimes starting out, and that's why we have Alicia, is that you're like, you told me to eat this, you said it was good on the webinar, but I can't do it. I feel horrible when I eat these foods. That is a sign that your gut bacteria is not happy. And so we need to, like you said, settle it down, calm the fires, figure out what's going on that's causing the problem, and change that situation, the environment of the gut, so that we can eat this way.
Yeah, and making those changes gradually. And right, this may be the phase that we're in right now, which is elimination phase and resting phase. And then what do we do now? And
Yeah.
how to test those things. It can be difficult at times to know how to, and scary once you feel better after doing an elimination diet, not wanting to bring other foods in and keeping that limited diet. But we know that that works against us as well. So how do we move gradually into reintroduction and do that in a way that supports symptoms and understanding what something actually might be a trigger for you that we need to for about 6 months or more just to see if that's going to be okay for you later. But that may be a difficult process to do on your own, and so we're here to help with that.
Mhm.
All right, moving our bodies. Caveat on this one, don't get overwhelmed, as I said before in the beginning, but there are multiple recommendations here and that I'm about to go through, and we want to reinforce that we want you to start where you are, focus on one or two priorities for you, what feels accessible, and build on this gradually as you gain strength, and we can do it safely. We can help you determine what's safe, what's realistic, and what's most valuable based on your goals right now. Number one, of course, you know by now, is going to be resistance training for multiple reasons. It is the foundation particularly as we age, for how we preserve muscle. So hand in hand, protein intake, resistance training. It's also essential for maintenance of bone health. And in particular, when we talk about menopause and the loss of estrogen, loss of bone mass as a potential there, we've got to be doing those two things to sustain that. Super important for metabolic health. We talked about muscle being a seed. It's a storage mechanism for circulating sugar. So the more lean muscle mass we have, the better ability we have to regulate some of that fuel. And then also independence as we age. So what do we need to be doing? Current guidelines recommend 2 to 3 sessions a week. Your floor is a minimum of 2. You want to be working all the major muscle groups in the body. And you can do that with weights. You can do it with machines. You can do it with resistance bands or body weight exercise. You can do it in classes. Sometimes that's what we need to get motivated to do it twice a week, is join a group. The key isn't the equipment that you use. It's being consistent. That is the bottom line, is you've got to be consistent with it every week and gradually increasing the challenge to the muscles over time. That's called progressive overload. The muscles need continuous stimulus and different stimulus, harder stimulus, to be able to know, hey, I need to continue to grow here. And so we want to aim for twice a week minimum, 3 times after maybe you've added some of these other things, and gradually increasing the challenge to the body. Second is aerobic, or if some of you may have heard of zone 2 training. Aerobic exercise supports our heart. It supports our brain and our mood. Very beneficial when we're feeling down and blue, just getting out and moving the body. It supports mitochondrial health, so the powerhouses of our cells and our energy. And of course, supports metabolic health. That's why we're talking about it today. What is considered aerobic? When you are doing the exercise, you want to work at a moderate pace where you can still carry on a conversation, but it's a little difficult. You can't comfortably sing a song, but you're walking with a buddy. It takes a bit. You're a little bit breathy. That's a good pace. That's typically what we would consider zone 2 of the heart rate. Brisk walking, cycling, rowing, swimming is great. Walking hills, putting on a weighted vest, doing walks or walking hills, they all count. Okay. Current guidelines, minimum 150 minutes per week, building towards 250 to 300 minutes when weight management is a goal. But I will add that you don't want to do stretch up to that at the expense of your 2 resistance training sessions or your sleep or your recovery. So we've got to be mindful of balance there. Next is general daily movement. Huge, a huge body of data out there that shows just moving from sedentary couch to even 4,000 steps a day has a huge impact in our overall health and longevity. You want to move often during the day, and you want to break up long periods of sleep, especially if you have sedentary work, right? So getting a realistic step goal. What does that mean? Science supports 7,000 steps is a great place to shoot to goal. If you want to get ambitious about it, 10,000. So between 7 to 10,000 is a great goal, but breaking it up during the day. So activity breaks, Dr. Rao mentioned earlier, 10-minute walk after meals, especially if you have that questionable meal that might be a little higher in carbohydrates. If you will walk 10 minutes after that, you will help buffer that spike in glucose that you would otherwise have if you didn't, because we talked about the muscles. You're recruiting the muscles to then take up that excess circulating glucose that otherwise is going to be stored as fat. So that's a great hack for when you want to have spaghetti for dinner. It'll help support glucose control and long-term health. So more movement throughout the day, even in short bursts. We want to hit on, also, I want to hit on high intensity fitness. Your cardiorespiratory fitness, hands down, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term health, your independence, and your mortality risk. You may have heard of this referred to as your VO2 max. But basically what it is getting in a little bit of short, high intensity intervals once or twice weekly after you have a solid fitness base to specifically improve cardiorespiratory fitness. You're improving the way that your body pulls in and utilizes oxygen. So you can do this in 16 minutes a week, an 8-minute interval session one day and an 8-minute interval session in another day. And so I can help you figure that out, but it's not a lot. A little bit goes a long way in terms of improving your fitness here. Last, I will mention, last but not least, mobility and balance. Mobility and balance can help preserve range of motion as we age, your confidence and your independence, while reducing fall and injury risk, which particularly after the age of 65 gets up there with cardiovascular risk in terms of mortality, just whether or not we recover from a fall. So including a few minutes of stretching, yoga is great for all the reasons, mind and body. Balance practice, standing on one foot while you're brushing the teeth. You can include that. Or just functional movements on most of the days is a good thing to consider. So again, not getting overwhelmed, picking 1 or 2 of these is a great place to start. So Dr. Rao, when you are thinking about helping a patient become more active, how do you decide what type of movement should come first based on their health, their fitness level, or maybe limitations that they might have?
So I think also remembering just those numbers, like 150 minutes a week translates to 21 minutes a day, and 300 minutes translates to 42 minutes per day. So you can break it down to say, okay, it's not so crazy. If I walk 40 minutes every day, I'm kind of hitting my second goal. And that 40 minutes could be 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night. So I kind of try to find what people like. So I would include gardening, dancing, whatever. Walking to me is kind of like, if you can, if you have no joint pains or if there's no limitations, that would be a wonderful place to start for people who don't do it. I jump right into resistance training as my next one too, because I think it's really important to do something with the weights, yoga, or if resistance bands, something that's going to put pressure on those tendons and ligaments, especially for postmenopausal women with bone density issues. So I kind of focus on the first two first, and then after we've kind of gained some momentum, we might move into more high intensity mobility and balance because there's a lot. I mean, everything is important, but it can be overwhelming to do it all. But if you break down into a 7 day block, it's a little bit easier to think, okay, I can do this because it's only 20 minutes of my day.
Yeah, great point. And just even walking the dog, right, counts.
Mhm.
Couple of times after the meal, walking the dog, getting it in that way. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, moving into our last segment, which is relaxation and sleep. Um, so great graphic here that helps us look at all the different ways that we can optimize sleep. I I would say that arguably, in my experience, when we talked in the beginning about getting the best bang for your buck, sometimes this is where we start. Because if we are not sleeping well, sleeping deeply, then this can really have a spillover in many aspects of our life. Because if we're tired, we just don't feel like eating well, prepping that meal. We don't feel like moving our bodies. So sleep really is the foundation for recovery. Sleep supports our brain health. It helps consolidate our memories, short-term memories, long-term memories. It's critical for our emotional balance. Anyone that has had poor sleep will respect that. Our metabolism, of course, and our long-term health. Deep sleep is also critical for the brain because it's when the system in the brain works to, I call it, take out the trash, or really detoxify and cleanse the system in the brain. But poor sleep, it also affects more than just energy and the way that we feel the next day. It can, over time, lack of good sleep can cause an increase in that inflammation. And we talked about what chronic inflammation can do. It can, right? It's precursor to the development of some chronic disease. It can impair our focus. And I mentioned it can make those healthy choices more difficult. So it's all related. We mentioned this in the beginning. It's all related. Better sleep makes nearly every other healthy habit easier to make. So the pillars of good sleep, what to consider is quantity. Am I getting enough of the good stuff? And I'll tell you, this varies person to person. It's individual. We want to aim for about 7 to 9 hours per night, but it depends on you and your individual needs. So we ask questions about the quality, like, are you falling asleep reasonably easy? Can you stay asleep? Do you feel restored when you wake up in the morning? That's all important and guides us as to whether or not you're getting enough of the good stuff. And then consistency is important. We want to keep bedtime and wake time within about the same 1 hour window, no matter the day of the week. So what are the things in this graphic here? We talk about how do we support better sleep? So you'll hear Dr. Rao talk a lot about circadian rhythm management, right? And so we talk about light receiving and light blocking. Light receiving is getting sunshine in your eyes at the beginning of the day, getting regular sunshine during the day, exposing yourself to it triggers your brain. It's time to be awake. And then we look at light blocking. So dimming the lights in the evening, the overhead lights, maybe using local light lamps, reducing screens in the evening, using blue blocker glasses, and even using the devices anyway towards the end of the day is really telling our brain it's time to continue to stay awake. Obviously, things like limiting caffeine later in the day. You probably know your own sensitivity to it. Everyone is different at what time you need to cut it off. Alcohol in the evenings is a huge disruptor of sleep. Heavy meals. So some people can go 2 hours. Some people need 3 to digest before they go to bed after dinner. Excess fluids, obviously not keeping you up going to the restroom in the middle of the night. Keeping the room and the bedroom dark and quiet and cool is a game changer for a lot of people. Just creating a simple wind down routine at night can be the difference between getting a good night's sleep. I recently worked with a client It took us close to a month to help her not only get her external environment set up for sleep success, but also her internal environment. The things that she needed to do to wind herself down, to get herself ready for bed, which was very challenging for her. So we just worked week by week on adding in a couple little things, um, keeping some consistent wake times, and then drinking less wine at night was what worked for her. And so, I'll ask you, Dr. Rao, when you've got someone who is struggling with sleep, what helps you determine whether or not the main issue is a lifestyle related issue or whether or not it might be an underlying medical condition?
So we always think about sleep apnea and things that are restrictive. If there is enough suspicion with snoring or, family members thinking that you're choking, quite frankly, the rings, the measuring devices, Aura rings, or the wearable devices that monitor sleep have been really helpful to identify disturbances. You can feel restless legs. You can feel the sheets going all over the place. You can see if a medication, for example, has too much adrenaline. So we kind of look at all these things. Are you taking a decongestant? Did you have a coffee in the afternoon? Something that's a stimulant that shouldn't be there. But then if everything kind of looks okay with the history and the meds and things like that, then we kind of look into just stress and aging, not giving yourself enough time. Again, all the things you went over. Is your room is it too much light? Is it too warm? I am a big what has helped me personally has been wearing those blue blocking glasses. If I wear them 1 or 2 hours before bed, my sleep is of such better quality than if I just put it on right before I go to bed and want to read a little bit. So I do find that keeping the room pretty dark, but if you need light to read or walk around, um, wearing those glasses that are red that block the blue light has been really helpful. Traditionally, our bodies want to slow down after sunset, and right now in the summer it's fine, but when the winter, when it sets at 5, we still all have to cook and take care of our families and drive around and things like that. So it's not possible, but you do the best you can with it. And then what I also think is an interesting point with your sleep issue is that it's not just about sleeping, right? So this is where like everything kind of overlaps. One thing that really helps sleep is exercise. So it's really great because if you are starting with saying, I don't sleep, but I also don't move, it doesn't matter where you start because you can exercise and hopefully that'll help your sleep. You can pick one or the other, you kind of wind up at the same place. And when you sleep, obviously, if you're rested, you're going to want to exercise as opposed to wanting to sit on the couch because you're so exhausted. And the other thing that I feel like also helps, is a big marker of an undiagnosed thing is uncontrolled high blood pressure. Oftentimes comes down to a sleep issue, which nobody's really talking about. Weight gain, that's really difficult to manage, comes down to a sleep issue. Sugar control, that's really hard. We can't figure out why they're having high sugar, comes down to a sleep issue. So, like Alicia, I also kind of obsess about sleep because it's such a key player in things that have been kind of uncontrolled for people and they don't figure can't figure out why because there's a general mentality of like I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like that's just not necessary. It's the first thing to go when we're stressed out. And the sad truth is that we'll actually get there faster, having chronic illness and things that are going to be hurtful for us if we don't sleep. So I think we just need to push into us prioritization for sleep because it's so critical to overall general health instead of kind of thinking of it as I'm lazy, I need sleep. I mean, people wear it as a badge of honor. Oh, yeah, I got 4 hours last night. But it's not actually, it's very, very bad for us to do that.
All right. All right. As we wrap up, where do you begin? I'll say again, I said in the beginning that your daily habits, what you're doing every single day, um, has a powerful influence on your health, but you don't have to change everything at once. Um, Start with one or two changes that feel meaningful and doable within reach, what you have bandwidth for right now. And you want to make them small enough that you can repeat them consistently because we talked about consistency is key. I also encourage you to choose a simple way to track your starting point. So if it's sleep, how many hours of sleep? Tracking devices are great. How many hours of sleep am I really getting? What is my protein intake? So maybe taking 3 days, looking and getting some great apps out there right now for free that'll help you track that. Maybe it's counting your steps. Maybe it's I'm at 0 weekly strength sessions. I want to get to 1, eventually to 2. So the goal is awareness of where you're starting, not perfection. Focus on consistency before you add more. I can't emphasize this enough. We get overwhelmed at times. I've done it myself, and I get excited about a new treatment plan. I want to do it all at once, but it's important to start small, review, go back and look at what is working, and also notice what's getting in the way. If you're not able to get to the gym, what's happening? What do we need to restructure to get you there? And then adjust that plan when needed. Support also matters. Huge here. A friend, a family member, a coach, or the care team at Dr. Rao's office, we can help provide the structure and the accountability and the encouragement to keep you going. And as one habit, as you nail that habit and it becomes more established, it's easier to take that momentum and build on that success. And this is really where I obviously believe that coaching can make a difference. Helping you sort through all of the different recommendations, choosing that right starting point, and then creating a realistic plan. And then inevitably, a week or two from now, when life changes and gets in the way, how do we tweak that plan so that we just don't throw our hands up and say, I can't do it at all? We modify, we change. And so I would just ask you now, we'll open it up for questions. Of everything that we discussed today, what is one change that feels important to you? Feel free to share that. And something that you might want to begin with, or ask questions based on something that we've said. Okay.
I think there's some questions here.
Yeah, I may let you take this first one, Dr. Rao. Can you see those? Lauren says, as a 65-year-old woman who went through menopause at 50, should I add hormone therapy to improve sleep, energy, libido, muscle tone, and other functions?
It's a great question, Lauren. It's very personal, and it's important to discuss the risks and benefits. The guidelines now talk about monitoring cardiovascular risk with hormone replacement therapy after a certain age of 65, as well as after 10 years after menopause. I don't think the answer is no. You could still be a candidate, but it's just important to know the risks and benefits for it. I'm a big proponent of adding hormone replacement therapy at any age because I've seen how much it helps with sleep quality, memory preservation, muscle tone and libido can be higher with things like testosterone, which are also acceptable to add. But sleep quality is one of the biggest things I see improve on hormone replacement therapy. So, and cognitive function. So, if that's a concern to you, if any of those things are important enough to kind of go on hormone replacement therapy, please talk to your provider because I do think it's worth it. And then Lauren had a second question, which you could probably take.
Yeah, great question, Lauren. What is a balanced plate for a vegan? And I think we just need to think of it in terms of what are your specific needs. So I'm just going to go with 100 because it's an easy number, and we go with the principles of dividing protein throughout the day, front loading a little bit more of it in the morning. We can certainly meet those protein needs. I find, need to be a little bit more conscientious about looking at the amount of protein we're getting in those vegan sources. So solid sources of protein, if you look at tofu, it's about the same as chicken in terms of 20 to 30 grams, depending on how many ounces of that you're getting. And so thinking through, how am I combining protein in that meal broken up through the day, and 25 at lunch, 25 at dinner, and using those sources, lentils and legumes and beans and tofu, and bringing those together to get the amount of protein that you need in a day. So it's just choosing that a little bit differently based on plant-based sources versus animal-based sources, if that makes sense. And so the concept is the same. and just doing a little bit of research. We have some guides that are available that can show the amount of protein in plant-based sources to help you get creative with how you combine those things, because we want to be careful too about calories, right? We don't want to have necessarily 2 cups of beans from a digestive standpoint. And so mixing the proteins and getting creative with how we do it, you don't necessarily, the thought isn't anymore that we have to have specific protein combination in the meal. If we look at it throughout the day and what you're getting in and getting in enough combinations of those proteins to get the amount, sometimes we just need to be a little more creative when it comes from plant-based sources in order to meet those daily needs. If that makes sense. Martha has a question. What are your thoughts on protein in drinks, specifically Premier Protein, as I am status post gastric bypass and I drink one daily to help my protein intake? I have found in my own experience and in my clients' experience, particularly women, it can be very difficult to reach the daily protein requirements without supplementing. And so I would say with anything that we do daily, what we put in our bodies, what we put on our bodies, we need to make sure it's a clean source. So if you're animal based, looking for, whey protein is typically one of the most researched and what we find to be one of the more bioavailable forms of protein. I have had some experience with Premier Protein. One of the things I would say in general with anything that you're taking in daily, minimal ingredients, anything that is third-party tested tends to be something, especially if you're taking it in daily, that I would recommend. So looking at the source and who's making it is important. A lot of these protein shakes I have found and powders are loaded with ingredients you do not need. Specifically, especially if you are working on gut repair. And in your case, this is something of consideration, is they're loaded with fillers and gums, and that can be really agitating to your gut. So something with protein, maybe something like a little bit of a natural sweetener like a monk fruit, and maybe like a vanilla flavoring, natural vanilla flavoring, not natural flavors, but vanilla bean. So minimal ingredient, high quality, what I call clean, third-party tested. It's important, third-party testing is important in particular, I think with everything, but with vegan sources of protein powders. Just the nature of what we use to make vegan protein powders tends to bind with heavy metals. So it's not that it's bad, the protein, it's just that those sources of protein can tend to lend more to heavy metals, which we want to tend to avoid. So third-party testing is important. And so I would look for protein powders to support that.
Do you have any, Alicia, that you are aware of?
Yes, I do. Be Well by Kelly is one of my favorite. It is, she's completely transparent. They have both hydrolyzed beef, which is non-whey. So that is what I am dairy intolerant. So I do use her hydrolyzed beef because I am animal-based as well. But it's broken down one molecule, so it's easier for me to digest. Someone who has digestive issues, easier to digest. And her vegan protein, very high quality. These are they tend to be more expensive because of that. They're third party tested. The sourcing is impeccable. So Lean, So Clean is a good one as well. I believe they have vegan. And then some of the goat protein, Mount Capra is a really good one. If you have trouble with digestion and want to look at an alternative, like a goat whey, one choose whey, but choose goat as an alternative to cow's milk dairy, that's a good one as well. Okay, and so you added to the, if someone can only change one thing first, nutrition, movement, or sleep, what tends to create the biggest ripple effect? I'll take it and then I'll have you chime in, Dr. Rao.
I think we have the same answer, Alicia.
I would say sleep. Gosh, sleep with nutrition next. They're right up there at the top. But again, if you are not sleeping well, it is overwhelming to try to think about all these nutrition things that we're talking about, getting in the protein, getting in and just even meal planning, meal planning to set yourself up for success in the week. So you're not just grabbing and going whatever's available. If you are tired, it makes everything else harder to do. And what I find sometimes is if we can make a couple of changes in sleep, like we talked about, not overhaul your sleep, but a couple of tweaks in sleep, and you might feel fantastic. It makes it so much easier for us to then move to nutrition.
No, I 100% agree with you. I find that so many places where there's like enigmas of why do I still feel so bad? And my diet is so pristine. I eat perfectly. I see a lot of people like that and they're not sleeping. So my go-to is always to try to figure out sleep because also energy is important because when we're trying to make all these changes, you need energy to do that. And I feel like sleep is going to be the best way to get you a little bit more energy up front.
Okay. Karen had a question about it's yes, it is definitely hard to eat so much protein, and you have to be very intentional about it, or you won't get enough in the day. So I've been taking creatine 5 grams per day to support muscle mass. I no longer focus on the amount of protein I eat, though I eat some protein with most meals. Is this okay?
I think
I
it's just a hard question to answer.
Yes.
Sorry. Because
This
I think that the protein is one thing, but also what is it doing? It's supporting muscle mass. It's supporting your glucose control. It's supporting inflammation in your body. It's also kind of holding up your structure or stature. So it's about trying to look at the trend for you. So are you finding yourself strong? Are you finding yourself able to do the activities you want? Has your performance been good? Do you find your glucose control to be optimal? All of these things matter in terms of knowing if you're doing enough. The challenge is that as we age, we need to do more because the natural aging process causes us to lose muscle mass. It's called sarcopenia, which is a real thing that causes our muscle mass to go down. So we have to do more and more and more as we get older in order to preserve, not even to build. So the answer is we can't tell you unless we know all of those parameters and to see your trend. So you want to look at your strength, you want to look at your stamina, you want to look at your ability, your metabolic numbers.
bone
So
density.
yeah, bone density, all of those things, because they're all playing a role in knowing if you're doing enough. The challenge for most of us is we're going to have to keep doing a little bit more, whether it's a little bit more exercise or a little bit more protein or a little bit better stress reliever, just because in order to stay stable, our body's homeostasis involves a little bit of everything. So we just need to, I don't know, I kind of think it's hard to answer.
I think it's individualized, and I do think that I think there's a floor, there's a threshold for it because of all the reasons that we've mentioned. And so I don't disagree with creatine. I think it's a very very well researched supplement and one of I would say a good foundational one for muscle for contributing to um, muscle and and I think we need to get enough protein. So I would say it's something that would be a nice individual conversation for you, Karen, to see if you're meeting enough of the needs for you specifically.
And I loved Alicia's, thought of the palm, just you don't have to go measure everything or look it up. You can kind of get an eyeball of, does this fit into my, in terms of proportions, 3 times a day, kind of have a serving size that fits into your palm of a protein-rich food. So it can become very annoying to kind of count things all the time, but if you use something like a palm size, it might be a little bit easier.
Okay, Ravi had a question. Hi, I'm 68-year-old male, vegetarian all my life, type 2 diabetic, hypertensive, and obese. I heard about the high omega-6 versus omega-3 ratio as a contributor to my obesity. Is there any truth in that? Many, many thanks. I can defer to you. I have a lot of things to say about the seed oil debate and what we need to consider, but given the context of Ravi's question and his specific individual needs, maybe you start.
Yeah, I 100% think that the standard American diet has a very high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. I know you're vegetarian, but you can be an unhealthy vegetarian or a healthy vegetarian. There's foods that are processed. They're cooked in lots of oils, even things that are related to, say, rice, for example. If you look at different types of rice, they have different glycemic indexes. There's so the omega-6, omega-3 ratio typically comes down to processed foods, I believe. I don't think you're eating a lot of omega-6 maybe through your diet. If you're not someone who eats processed foods, then maybe you can talk a little bit, Alicia, about the oils that you're using. But there is inflammation that is usually surrounding visceral fat, which is the fat that you don't pinch. It's the fat around the organs that can be very high, that can cause increased risk for things like cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes. Fat accumulation in these organs can be very, very inflammatory, and they can be fueled by the imbalance between the omega-6, omega-3 ratios. So I do think that obesity is very key to all of those illnesses that you've listed. Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity is a key part of that. So I do believe that omega-6 to omega-3 ratios are important.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where I would say test, don't guess. It's very inexpensive to do. There are home tests available now for $50, Mega Quant, where we can look at this and follow to know specifically what yours are. If you're not referring to knowing that your omega-6 versus omega-3 ratio is out of proportion. And so I think that's a great guide because that helps guide whether or not your diet is working for you or against you, which I think is part of your question, and whether or not we want to consider supplementation, strategic supplementation, vegetarian supplementation to help bolster your omega-3 intake. And so just to spin off of Dr. Rao's point, where the debate comes in is really, they say, what we say is omega-6 tend to be a little more inflammatory than omega-3s. Omega-6s in our population, in the US populations, there are disproportionate levels of omega-6 to omega-3. It's not that one is bad over the other necessarily, but omega-6s tend to come from our packaged goods, overconsumption. We talked about processed and packaged goods, right? So we're over consuming and it's out of proportion, the 6s to the 3s. The 3s are what we talked about earlier. So olive oils, avocado oils, nuts, seeds, things like that. Where eating those as part of your whole foods diet and bolstering those up tend to help us with that underlying inflammation that we've got brewing. And a lot of times in situations where, like you with type 2 diabetes, potentially hypertensity and obesity, it can be favorable for us to ensure you're getting enough omega-3s, everyone really in general, and that we're limiting some of these omega-6s. So it's not a seed oil debate, it's an out of proportion debate necessarily, because small batch oils, minimally processed, are okay for us. Sesame seed oil, things we're drizzling on our salads, those are good for us. Diversity is good for us. It's just when we get out of whack with those that we tend to see those contributing to problems in the body.
The other thing I'll just mention is that it's mostly the carbohydrates that can be causing the visceral fat too. It's not just the fats that we're eating. In fact, it's mostly the simple carbs. So I would kind of think that most of the obesity we see in this country is really based on excessive carbohydrates too, not just the fats. Okay.
I have David.
Did we miss a bunch here? Okay.
I stopped share because so they could see our faces. Because I wanted to ask a clarifying question of David. Please repeat the protein you mentioned. Oh, the protein suggestions I mentioned. Let me just type it in the chat. And that way it's memorialized for everyone. Be Well by Kelly, So Lean, So Clean. And then I believe the goat-based one, if you need an alternative, is Mount Capra. And those are just a few. They're third-party tested, very clean, and those that pop into the top of my mind that they're in chat. How do you suggest getting amino acids? Mila asked.
Um, I can take that. So aside from eating proteins, you can also take protein powders, which are there are cleaner ones, and my one of my favorites is the from the company Naked, which is there's no coloring, there's no sweeteners in it. It's literally raw pea protein. They have a whey version as well that I think is pretty clean. That's kind of the one that I recommend. I am familiar with cassava. I think it's a decent protein. I think it has monk fruit in it,
So
maybe stevia too, but I think it's monk fruit. It is also serves for some people as a multivitamin, so it's got a lot of food-based nutrients. So it serves to give people minerals and nutrients as well as the amino acids. So it's not a bad product in my opinion. I don't know if you want to add anything, Alicia.
no, I have checked. It's been a minute since I checked it out. It seems to be one of the cleaner ones that I would lean to. I would check to see if the plant-based one, if they're third-party testing it. That's typically what I don't know about cachava. And just making sure there's not anything in the ingredients that you can't identify. Some people split hairs. About natural flavors. A lot of these things you'll see natural flavors. Uh, we don't know what's in that, and that can be a place where companies can hide things. I use a lot of the personal brands I use are momentous. And so you want to make sure there's transparency around ingredients. So if you have something like now you love it and it works for your gut, um, a lot of people use athletic greens and things like that. If you can, I can email Momentous. I have emailed Momentous and said, what is the natural flavoring in your vegan protein powder? And they came back and said it's a blend of cacao and da 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 da. And I trust they third party test. I trust them as a company. So part of it too is like, what are you taking in every day? Do you trust it as a company? What are their transparency practices? Things like that too. I'll let you take this one. Are there any CPAP alternatives you suggest for someone diagnosed with apnea?
Yeah, Elaine, there are lots of things that you can try to do. Something simple as mouth tape sometimes works for people. Opening up the nasal passages with different types of tape. Myotape is a company that has tapes for sleep apnea. Sometimes it works. It works really well. Dental devices can also help. Changing airway, working with the dentist that also works on airway can help. Weight loss can help. Medications like GLP-1s have been shown to help with sleep apnea. So there's quite a few options.
Beverly says, I've been on Whole30 plan since July 1. Is it best to obtain metabolic assessment while still limiting sugar, carbs, dairy? So while still in the Whole30 window, I guess she's asking.
You probably want to do it once you're done, just to see what your new set point is. Because it's, in my opinion, if you're not able to sustain this, then you're talking about measuring. Yeah, you'll know if you changed,
Yeah.
but what you really want to know is, are you sustaining it? So I would check when you're done with the plan and back on your regular food plan.
Okay. All right. That's it that I can
Hey
see.
guys.
Don't see anything else in the actual other chat. So it looks like I think that's it for questions.
Great. Thank you so much for the engagement, guys. You were very engaged and asked great questions. Thank you, Alicia, for a wonderful presentation. We are going to continue to have these webinars, and if there's a topic that you're very much interested in, we can put together a webinar. One of the things Alicia and I want to talk about in the future is metabolic flexibility, which is a whole conversation on itself on how do we change from burning fat and carbs. What is healthier for us, and how do we facilitate something like that? So that'll come out sometime in the future, but if there's other topics you guys want to hear about, let us know.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.